As you did before, yeah.
Okay. So this is the poem Digging by Seamus Heaney. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests, snug as a gun. Under my window, a clean rasping sound when the spade sinks into gravelly ground. My father, digging. I look down till his straining rump among the flower beds bends low, comes up 20 years away, stooping in rhythm through potato drills where he was digging. The coarse boot nestled on the lug. The shaft against the inside knee was levered firmly. He rooted out tall tops, buried the bright edge deep to scatter new potatoes that we picked, loving their cool hardness in our hands. By God, the old man could handle a spade, just like his old man. My grandfather cut more turf in a day than any other man on Toner's bog. Once I carried him milk in a bottle corked sloppily with paper. He straightened up to drink it, then fell to right away, nicking and slicing neatly, heaving sods over his shoulder, going down and down for the good turf, digging. The cold smell of potato mold, the squelch and slap of soggy peat, the curt cuts of an edge through living roots awaken in my head. But I've no spade to follow men like them. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests. I'll dig with it.
Nice.
Nice.
Great.
I was getting a master's in literature at the University of Utah, and I think his book, Fieldwork, was assigned. Mm-hmm. I think Elizabeth Bishop's Geography 3 was assigned, probably Sylvia Plath's book Ariel was assigned. So it was, it was sort of classic contemporary poetry, and again, as I said, I was never comfortable in a poetry class because normally, just like any subject in our industrialized sort of school model, that you just, here's a piece of art, so take it apart. Here's another piece of art, take it apart. Here's another piece of art, take it apart. So it's all about sort of rationally dissecting things that are sort of meant to be more organic. It's all to get a grade, to get some, sort of product that you can then sell, to get a job. It's all like just pretty obvious, but you get so used to it, you don't even know what things are. You don't even know what poems are. You just think it's just another puzzle or problem. It's not anything other than that. I think I just remember sitting in the class, and when we were talking about it, and I rarely participated because, again, I was never confident about what I would say about a poem, but I think I said something like to the professor, who was this really kind of egocentric, kind of smarty pants guy from Yale. There were a lot of Yale people at the University of Utah where I was going, and I just said, you can write a poem and mention like a family member. Like, it was just a totally idiotic comment. Like, he mentions his father in that poem, and he's like, yeah. And so for some reason, I don't think I'd ever read a poem that was actually about someone's family, which sounds crazy. But I was like, okay, that just, again, a switch flipped. Right. And I think after that, anytime I was like in a literature class, I was always thinking, like, wouldn't you rather be the person who wrote all this stuff rather than the people in the room, like, taking it apart? It's kind of fun. You get to show off how smart you are, but it's like, but really there's nothing to show for it, Like, I would rather be the person that made this stuff. And it wasn't until I think I started to realize that poems could be personal that I thought, okay, maybe I think I probably told you maybe when we were in class that I came to writing poetry by mistake.
Yes, I was going to ask you to tell that story again.
Yeah. So, so then my wife and I had moved to Florida, where she was, starting her classes for a PhD, and I thought I would use that time to start writing something about one of my grandfathers, who was a silver miner in Park City, Utah for over 30 years. And so every day I would sit down to sort of write about him, and I'd write for about 3 hours every day. Finally, after, I don't know, maybe 6 months, I showed it to my wife to read, and she read it, and she was like, it's not very good. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know why it's not good. I'm sweating blood over this thing every day. And so I went back and I started reading it, and I realized I sort of compressed the language and the sense in certain paragraphs such that the paragraphs actually seemed like poems. So I just took out some of the paragraphs and I sent them as poems to a poetry contest, and won this poetry contest, which came with like a scholarship to like this workshop that this guy Peter Meinke, this well-known poet who was living in Florida, ran. And then also there was like a banquet where, weirdly, Tobias Wolff was the keynote speaker. Like they had enough money that they flew in Tobias Wolff, who's not a poet, he's obviously a fiction writer, but so it was sort of like, okay, this happened, but I really had no idea how I had written those poems.
Right.
So I had to reverse engineer and go back to poems like Seamus Heaney's or Elizabeth Bishop's and try to figure out, okay, what actually are poems made of? Like, and how do you start from the inside out in terms of writing a poem versus always reading and analyzing, going from the outside in, So I think there's a big difference between making something or constructing something and deconstructing something, which is what most of us are used to doing as students. So I think like your project is a good one because it really is more about keeping things whole,
Right.
It's just about sharing people's stories, and then what's the end product? Nothing. You just shared, you just listened, and you like took someone's art in. And I think just letting other people share art is enough, and there's just very few ways to do that, because again, schools seem like the most obvious place where art is shared, but again, it's not shared freely. It's like you pay for it, you have to write critical essays about it,
Right.
You mentioned the Tiger Room, so
Yeah.
I'll just throw that out there. So that the Tiger Room was an idea that this other poet, Sin Sawatch, and I had. We were both sort of older poets when I was invited to read at this thing called the Dollhouse Reading Series, which was at two young women's apartment in Lincoln Square, and it was packed. And I didn't start reading until about, like 11 o'clock. It was like, everybody was there, but nothing happened until late. But it was the first time I read in someone's personal space. I read in their living room, and I had probably 30 people sitting around my feet while I was reading. It was incredibly intimate, and I don't think I've ever been more nervous than. It was like suddenly these are all my children, and I'm reading something, but it's something I also wrote, So it was really a sort of a wonderful sort of surprise and idea that we had, like, let's do this for other people. We'll start it much earlier, and so we just started doing the Tiger Room salon at my house, and I know most of the literary people in Chicago, I would say, after being involved for so many years, and those are the people that come to the Tiger Room, and to the person it's like it's the kind of event that they like the most, because it's not a bookstore, it's not a library, it's not some kind of impersonal hall. It's just you in somebody's living room sharing, we say, sort of unfinished work that maybe you're open to the group kind of chatting with you about, maybe offering some suggestions. So it's a vulnerable sort of thing to do, to put yourself in someone's house and to maybe share something that's not quite finished. But
Yeah.
it's like, I think people like to take those kind of risks, but do it in a really cozy, welcoming, friendly space where most everybody else is a writer too, so they completely, identify with and respect the fact that someone's putting themselves out there. So yeah, well, I like that idea of like how do you learn to be a better learner?
Right.
Because you really are on your own. There's nobody encouraging you. As a parent too, and I get it. It's like it's easy to sort of think about things superficially, like congratulating your kids for getting a good grade or for winning a thing, and when in fact inside you realize that like none of that really gets to who someone is. Like it's their character that matters. But it's easy. The only things we have are kind of like these surface events that they're easy to acknowledge, or maybe the only thing you can kind of call attention to. So I tell my daughters, my wife and I have been in higher education forever. We're just like, look, your grades aren't the most important thing. The school you get into is not the most important thing. We say all those things, but everything else in their lives is telling them just the opposite of that. Right. And so it's I only figured it out, I guess, once I got out, and I was thrown back on myself trying to figure out what a poem was, where I sort of was like climbing back up this mountain that I'd already climbed in one way and just maybe climbing the other side, where, no one was over there, but I gradually figured out what this stuff was, because you grow up, you're handed these perfect books where everything's already been edited, everything's, you don't get a sense of how messy writing or thinking is as a student, because you're just handed things that have had all the mistakes edited out of them. So you realize that, as a writer or artist, that it's much messier, much more difficult than it's made to seem in a kind of a clinical environment in a classroom where everything's already finished. I had the idea for the first anthology that I did when I was at a play called An Iliad, and a friend of ours was actually it was at the University of Chicago Court Theater, and it was a one-man show. So he was playing this character who's called the Poet, but he happened to remember every war ever fought. And so he's, kind of lucid and at times hysterical and remembering and forgetting. And at one point he lists all the wars ever fought. He recites all these names of these wars. And anyway, it was incredible. But I remember sitting there thinking, like, you never hear about war except from, TV newscasters. At least most of us don't. And so it just really hit me that I think this is what the best art does, is it starts to make you question, what you've gotten accustomed to or what you've gotten used to. So we just digest the world in these little bits through, news shows or, Instagram posts or TikToks or whatever. Like the biggest, most important things in the world are coming at us in these like microseconds and these micro images, and we just flip past them like they're nothing,
Right.
So when suddenly, it sounds stupid, but suddenly war seemed like something to me, and so I thought, what? I want to talk to people who actually fought in wars. Like that was literally as obvious. And maybe normally like this is how journalists get started, where they realize, like, I just want to go to where that happened and start talking to people. That was literally what happened to me sitting at that plane. Like, I just want to I'm going to talk to some soldiers or people that work in the military that are involved in some wars. So I can't remember who recommended this, but I started going to some of the VA barbecues around town. So I would also bring my daughters, who were like 2 or 3, and the cutest humans on the planet. So, you know, I people would talk to me. I would tell them about the project, and many of them would immediately kind of, you know, go quiet, because someone's war memories are, you know, just so important and so personal. Finally, one person came over to me and said, "Look, you know, no one's gonna talk to you unless they feel like they can trust you." So it really took one veteran to trust me, and then they would then tell someone else, and that person would tell someone else. So it really was, it happened on the ground, you know. It just sort of happened in this really, I don't know what the word is, but, you know, just a really human way. And then it turned out, after, you know, collecting all the memories and doing readings and whatnot, like, the best part about editing an anthology is meeting the people that you include. So it was like I had this, you know, whole new community of veterans that were, you know, kind of like my friends, and we would do events together, and I'd get to know them. And, you know, because writing can be obviously very solitary. Normally, as a poet, it's just you know, like raking over your own memories. But, like, if you edit an anthology, suddenly you've got this whole new crowd of folks that you learn about, that then, you know, some of those people might, you know, become part of your own community. And I'll just mention too, like, that idea about you know, our perception of war being mediated, or in all kinds of ways, is that, you know, in the U.S., you know, there's no mandatory military service, so the vast majority of people who are in the military are low income people, usually from rural areas. So our wars are fought now by an incredible minority of people, and so the majority of us have no sense of what that's about, and then there's no platforms for people who actually do serve to then share their ideas, share their stories, to tell their stories, you know. Whereas in other cultures where there's like maybe a mandatory 2-year military service, you know, most people in the communities have served. They can talk to each other, they tell each other, they can understand each other's stories. But in the U.S., we have no platform, no public square for people who've served in a war to get up and tell their stories. So we don't even, we have, again, no firsthand accounting. But yeah, I think, you know, the sort of the difference between, like, film images and, like, images that you might read or create for something that's written, again, is that the imagery for something that I write comes from inside of me, based on my unique experience as a human, my own unique reading history. Like, you know, if I watch a film, it's the images are chosen for me. They're not something that I can immediately relate to. I have to try to, you know, triangulate to try to figure out, okay, can I trust that image? You know, where is that coming from? Why is that coming at me? But, and so I think the trick to being a writer is that and I think you can do this with film, but maybe not as easily as you can as a writer, is that you have to construct poems or stories where people are allowed, there's space for people to bring in their experiences and their imagination, so that, you know, what you're writing is not pedantic and predictable, but, like, open. You know, Keats's idea is this idea of negative capability. We talked about it in our writing classes, liberating uncertainty. Like, how do you write concretely while paradoxically also writing openly, so that others are projecting their lives into, you know, this picture that you're you're
Right.
painting on a page.
Yeah, I think it's a great, yeah, that's a